Welcome to another technical video about the new Odyssey clutch hub, and this time we're going to talk about the main event, the bearings. I'm very pleased that we now have our US and foreign patents filed, so I can actually talk about this in some detail, where I had to keep quiet before. So, what's the problem with Freecoaster bearings? Well, the main problem is the driver bearings. These are so small that they just explode as soon as they see any kind of action. Let me explain to you why that is. Now, in a traditional cassette hub, the hub shell runs on two bearings, one each side, on the axle, and those bearings take all the load. But with a Freecoaster hub, you've got to get the drive through to the inside of the hub. So what happens is that the shell runs on the driver, and then the driver runs on its own little bearings on the axle. That means that whenever you're pedaling, the whole wheel is running on these tiny little driver bearings. Now, in terms of an ordinary radial load, those bearings aren't too bad, and they can actually cope with it reasonably well. But BMX is not all about simple loads. It's about crashing and landing tricks twisted and from an angle. So, if you imagine doing a 360 or a 180 or a tail whip or something like that, when the bike comes down, you can easily get what we call an axial load, a load to the side. Now, if you hit this way, it's not so bad. All the load comes in through the spokes to the hub shell, and then this little shoulder here pushes against this nice big beefy bearing, and that goes through the collar or the cones into the dropout, and everything's fine. But when you land a trick going this way, all the load comes in through this nice big driver bearing, outside driver bearing, but then onto the inside of the driver and through these tiny little bearings. Now, to put some numbers on that, this big bearing on this side, in terms of an axial load, is happy with about 1,600 newtons. That's about 360 pounds of force. And as you can imagine, that's a nice big load. And you don't give it too many hits at that angle, so it lasts a long time. These little driver bearings here, though, they're rated at 70 pounds, or about 300 newtons. That is just not enough. So it's not surprising that they soon blow up. Manufacturers try putting two bearings in here, or maybe even three bearings, or they put a needle in there as well, but none of that really helps, and you don't end up with a total load capacity of much over 100 pounds. So, as soon as you are doing 360s, 180s, tail whips, bashing into a ledge, or any other kind of thing where you're hitting the wheel sideways, they just blow up. So, the simple way to deal with this was just not to have these in there. And what we do on our cassette hubs, which works incredibly well, is have a nice needle roller bearing in there. Now, needle roller bearings are nice and small, so they fit inside a 9-tooth driver and still allow you to have a nice strong axle. But they can only take radial loads. They can only take your weight on the bicycle straight up and straight down. So if you just put that in there, then the whole hub would slide along the axle. So these bearings have a very nice high capacity though, so they are strong and durable. So we pop one in there, and then we need to stop the hub moving. Now, in terms of moving that way, we already have a nice shoulder and it works fine. And we know the bearing can take that load because it's done it for years. So all we had to do was add a circlip on this side. This means that when you hit the hub that way now, the load can come through the shoulder to the circlip and through the circlip to the bearing. So it's just as strong for loads that way as it is for loads that way. This means that we don't need any kind of axial engaging bearings on this end. So we end up with a situation where the bearings are very strong and durable. Now, adding that circlip is a pretty subtle change, and it can look like we've done nothing at all, but it makes all the difference in the world. And you can now expect your bearings to last almost indefinitely. Now then, the other problem that happens with bearings is that the hubs develop wobble. The reason this happens is that it's just poor tolerancing. So, in most hubs, you can just pull that driver out of that bearing because it isn't a good fit. But we've made it a proper engineered press fit. So now you don't develop wobble in that area either. That's about rounds it up for the bearings. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you on the next one. Goodbye.